Okay, welcome everyone to today's Guardian Animal Protecting Livestock webinar. This is the last in the three-part series. Today is on alpacas. Today's webinar is brought to you by Leading Sheep Project, which is a partnership between Australian Wool Innovation, Queensland Government and AgForce. Today we'll be hearing from three people. Firstly, Pat Hegarty from Colanya Longreach, then Peter Sheehan, Trinidad and Quilpie, and lastly David Jenkins, who's done some research with them at the Sturt University. The producers today will be giving their experiences with the alpacas as they're using them at the moment and giving their opinion on how they're working for them and the do's and don'ts. So without anything further from me, I'll hand over to Pat Hegarty for the first presentation. Thank you, Pat.
Right, thanks, Alex, and hello, everyone. I'm Pat Hegarty from Longreach in Western Queensland, and my wife Sue and family, we run a sheep property up here where we basically run all sheep. We don't own any cattle. We've got 33,000 acres of country here, and we run a sheep breeding enterprise, and we do a lot of adjusting, just a lot of cattle for people, just for cash flow and for pasture management, to assist in pasture management. As you can see in some of those photos there, we've got quite a few hills around our property on the western and the southern side. We've got a line of hills that virtually only half a kilometre off our boundary, and that's a really great haven for dogs. And pretty much all our lives we've had some sort of a problem here with dogs. And we have always baited for 1080, probably since back in the 1970s we started aerial baiting, a lot of that rough country, with 1080 for dogs, which in those days seemed to control them quite well. But in more recent years, by that I mean in the last 10 years or so, we don't seem to be having as much success with the baits, and we seem to be doing a lot more baiting and a lot more trapping. And up to about 5 years ago, I started to get really interested in the alpacas or guardian animals. I've done a fair bit of reading on the alpacas. I hadn't sort of done anything with donkeys, and I've been a bit busy this week, or I would have attended that webinar on the donkeys on Wednesday, but did quite a bit of reading on the alpacas and the dogs and the Maremma dogs. And I sort of feel that I needed to bait as well, so that was why I wasn't that keen on going to the Maremmas, just because of the nature of the country around us. And the fact that I've got no sheep around me, pretty much all cattle around me, and a fair bit of rough country, and quite a few absentee landholders around me. So I thought that I needed to do virtually everything: trapping, baiting, and the use of guardian animals. So we got interested in the alpacas about 5 years ago, and at that stage I didn't really have a clue where to access any. Saw a few ads in the land and that sort of thing, so I started to make a few phone calls about them, and eventually got onto a guy down at Wellington, and he supplied me with, I think it was 16 I bought originally, wethers, or some wethers for $500 each. And we brought those up here and went to a lot of trouble to try and assimilate them with sheep. We just put them in our cattle yards when they first arrived for a few days and fed them on hay and that sort of thing with some sheep. Then gradually let them out into bigger paddocks, into our house paddock, which is sort of 60 or 70 acres, sorry. And just put the guys in there with those until they actually seemed to bond with them okay. And then we split them up into small mobs of about 4 and put them out with the sheep. Initially we lost quite a few alpacas, which was very disappointing, not only from the monetary point of view, but the fact that we didn't have them there to use as guardians. And we suspected that it was a weed we've got up here called Himalaya. And because those alpacas, excuse me, came from down south, totally different environment to this one, we suspected that they were eating that Himalaya. Himalaya is poisonous to cattle, but it doesn't seem to worry the sheep that much. But I'm pretty confident that that was what rolled those alpacas on us, which was very disappointing, and we actually lost about half of what we purchased initially. So the next year we bought another 12, and we sort of were still unaware of really what was causing it, but it's very, very hard to sort of have them on country that doesn't have any of that familiar. We've got very stony country, but the familiar tends to favour that type of land, so we basically just had to wear it, I felt, and just get the guys to adapt, which was a big loss in some ways, but slowly but surely they seem to have got used to the country and used to what they can and can't eat, and now we're running our alpacas. Our wethers in mobs of about 6, and we'd have 6 in with sort of 500 to 600 to 700 ewes at a time, in paddocks of anything from 2,500 to sort of 3,500 acres. Mostly on our western and southern side because that's where our biggest dog threat is. We, as I said to Alex one day, we never actually see them doing a great deal. They tend to wander around. They're nearly always with the sheep, and I think they're getting better at being with the sheep. And I've never actually seen them attacking a dog or any dead dogs around that I think they've killed. But I must say that since we've had them, we seem to have very few attacks. I'm fairly confident now that they are having quite a good effect because I've actually seen them chase sheepdogs a couple of occasions. We try to avoid having them with the sheep. When we muster the sheep in, we tend to cut them off in the paddock. And as recently as 2 days ago, we were mustering a mob of ewes for crutching, and I had an instance there where I had a little bitch with me that I used for mustering, and one of these, two big black alpacas come out of the mob and well and truly went for her. And they weren't bluffing, they were fair dinkum. They took off after her, and one of them was trying to strike her with his front feet and sort of kick at her. And I just called her off and she came and jumped back on the bike. So I like to see that sort of thing. I have a lot of confidence that they are actually doing the job, even though they tend to just wander around and seemingly never do much, but I'm pretty sure that they are actually doing more than we give them credit for at times. As far as management's concerned, we shear the boys once a year. We always shear them in our cattle yard. We don't shear them in our sheep yards because we don't want any of their wool in there, even though it's not considered a big contaminant. When I was first researching the use of alpacas, I actually rang AWEX one day and got their opinion on what they thought about having alpacas running with sheep from the point of view of contamination in the wool, and they told me that they saw sheepdogs or dogs in a shearing shed as a bigger threat than they did alpaca wool, because they don't shed their wool obviously, so it's not a big problem. But we always do it in the cattle yards, and at this stage we're still doing it on the ground, as you can see in those photos there. We just lay the guys down in the yard on some conveyor belt and shear them. It's a reasonably slow process, but we do that once a year, and we give them a 5-in-1 vaccine at the same time and a drench, and that's basically all we do to them, other than try and make sure they've got good feed. Most of the time, if it dries off a bit, we tend to put out round bales of grass hay for the sheep, and they eat it as well. We've sort of run them in their own mobs. We've got sort of 6, as I said earlier. We've actually tagged them with colour tags now, so that if we do happen to have them in the yards, we can always put the same ones back together so that they're in those groups. Because when I originally lost those first few, when I first bought them, the guy that I bought them off suggested that some of them may have fretted because they were split up from their mates. So we've tried to overcome that by now, always ensuring that we have them in their own groups. So we, this year earlier, we decided we'd buy some females and a buck. That fellow that I'm talking to there in that photo is the buck that we bought. They come from way down at Narandera in southern New South Wales, and some of those females had babies on them when they came, and they were pregnant again, and I paid $500 for a pregnant female with a big sort of a baby at foot. And when we got them up here, we weaned the big ones off. And they're all males. Those big ones that they had a big cria, they call the little ones. And since then, some of them have had babies. We've had 5 of the females have had babies since, and unfortunately 3 of them died. for whatever reason. So they do seem a bit susceptible to dying on you, which is disappointing. But it's all a learning curve for us, and we've still got those females, still got about 8 or 9 females, which we will hopefully breed a few more from in the future to try and build up our numbers. I would like to increase our numbers quite substantially. At the moment we've got about 32 alpacas here, counting the females. That's not counting those little baby ones. But I would like to be in a position to have around about 8 or 10 in every paddock on the place, which for that I would need probably 100 or 150 alpacas. And I just would like to do that just so that we had a presence in every paddock, because I think just having that presence of the alpacas there would be enough to deter a lot of dogs. Even though maybe, they might have a few problems with packs of dogs, but I don't think at this stage, fortunately for us, we have many packs of dogs come in. It's generally 1 or 2 dogs at a time. And I think, excuse me, just having that presence there would be enough to deter the dogs, because they mark out the alpacas mark out their territory pretty well with their dung piles and all that type of thing. So I think once the dogs realised they were there, they would avoid this place quite a bit. I'm confident they would keep away. I'm not confident enough that you would keep away 100% of the dogs. You would still get some come through, and I think you would still get the odd attack, because in big paddocks like 3,500 acres, it's nearly impossible for them to cover all that area themselves. We have a lot of channels and fairly undulating country, so they could be on one side of the paddock and there could be a dog on the other, and they're probably not going to see each other. But I just feel that down the track we would like to have more for that reason. How am I going for time, Alex?
Yeah, you're right, Pat. Keep going.
Okay, that's nearly about it, though. Can't think of anything else, so I've got some notes here that I just, those little males that we bought earlier this year on their mums, they're currently around about 10 to 12 months of age. I haven't castrated them yet. The actual lady that I purchased them off told me to castrate them at about 6 months of age, and I haven't, and I deliberately haven't, because I wanted them to grow a bit more. And I've also been advised by a few people that they tend to get a bit more aggressive if you leave their testicles in a bit longer. And one lady even suggested to me that you leave them in there up to 2 years and then castrate them just to get them a little bit more aggressive. And that's the aggressiveness is what I'm looking for. Alex, I don't know that I've got a great deal more as far as fences are concerned. They are very good on fences, I find. Any good sheep fence will keep them in. We've virtually never had any problem with them getting out of their paddocks. They always stay well within their own paddocks, and as they sort of got used to the sheep more and more, they are always with the sheep now. Very rarely are they away from the sheep, which I find very comforting to have them there, and just gives you a sense of security that they are there, because I'm very confident, just given the way they treat a sheepdog when you go out there. I reckon if any dog came near that mob, they'd be there. Even if they didn't attack it, they would bluff it. And the dog would say, "No, this, I'm going somewhere else." And just a lot of confidence. But certainly the couple of times that I've seen them go after sheepdogs, I think the dog would be in a lot of trouble. And these two guys that attacked my little bitch the other day, they weren't bluffing, and they were very angry. So I think there's been dogs in there, because we're a few years down in that paddock, unfortunately, and I think they've probably been getting a bit of a touch-up, so I think those guys were right onto it. That's why they attacked that little dog the other day. But it's good to see, and I'm confident of their health. Thanks, Alex.
Righto, thanks very much, Pat. That was a good presentation. Right, our next presentation today is from Peter Sheehan. Peter's at Trinidad near Corpy, and we'll hear from him about his alpacas.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Sheehan from Trinidad, as Alex was saying. We got into alpacas about 3 years ago. We're having a lot of losses on our inside country, as we call it. We've got about 40,000 acres inside the barrier fence where the dogs aren't as bad, where we run what's left of our flock. If you have a look at this next slide, the first 2 alpacas we bought, we put them with our rams that live about a kilometre from our house. We bonded them for a couple of days. The rams seemed to like the alpacas more than the alpacas like the rams, but they all settled down. And unfortunately, one of the 2 died. So we looked at getting a few more to run just with our other sheep because we were impressed with the way those couple turned out for the duration they were here together. We bought a few more, and we had them in a holding paddock and bonded them for a mob of sheep. And in the learning stages, as we all do, we mustered the sheep out for crutching, and we just left the alpacas in the paddock. And unfortunately, a mob of feral goats come in, and they decided to bond with the feral goats. So that's something we have to be a bit more aware of. That we just couldn't leave them behind here. We always had to bring them with the mob and leave them with the mob as much as we could. Otherwise, I would find something else to bond with. That's just a little mob of alpacas. You might be able to see that just walking out with a mob of Sheehan sheep. We muster them the same way as we muster our sheep. There's never really any major drama in that way of handling. If you try and split their little mobs up, they get a bit panic-stricken. We have been slowly buying more in over the years, and we're up to about 25 now. And the last lot were a bit younger than the original alpacas we had here, so we tried to split both mobs up, and well, they got a bit concerned about their mates disappearing for a while, but they soon got used to one another again in different mobs and bonded with the sheep quite well. Where we do run our alpacas, paddock's probably around 10,000 acres. There's probably one about 18,000. Now, our sheep weren't feeding all over the country. They weren't following the wind. Since we've had the alpacas running with them, they work all the country now. They're at every water. They're not just bottled up in one corner. I've never seen an alpaca work. The closest I've seen was they put one of our shearing contractors' dogs out of the sheep yard one shearing. So we made it very clear to him that don't push the point. We definitely don't want to confuse the alpacas with use of his dogs in the yard at the time. He used them up in the shed, but not in the yard. Shearing's not a lot of fun. It's a steady job. We get the shearers to do it. They're pretty good and keen to do it. We have changed things a bit. We don't do them in the shed anymore, and we do hobble them. We found putting the bag over their head makes them a bit more settled, a bit more easy to get along with. We don't do anything else with them bar shear them. They do look after themselves pretty well. The only thing we do find is when the season starts turning and getting a bit drier, they do seem to go into just look after themselves mode. They don't seem to spend as much time with the sheep as you'd like them to, and they tend more to look after themselves. We try not. Well, we hope the seasons don't get that bad, so they have to look after themselves, but occasionally they do, and that does happen. Just another photo of shearing. The wool's terrible stuff. It gets sticks to everything. Very clingy and has a lot of dirt through the fibres. It's not commercial as far as we know. We never try to sell it or anything. It just gets put in the wool pack, and we have had some person ring up who was a spinner and wanted it, so we were more than happy to give it to them. They are a bit prone to eating poisonous weeds, like Pat was saying. We have lost probably 4 to poisonous weeds, I'd say, which is not a good thing. Just for the loss of animals more than anything, I suppose. But we've had good results since we've had them. I don't believe we have a big dog problem where they run. They are on the inside of the barrier fence, where we have less dogs, but I know there is still dogs in that country. Unfortunately, they don't run on us a lot. They just come in and go back out. we probably have the same problem with Pat, absentee landlords, bullock depots, and that around us now we're the only sheep for probably 100k from any direction. So yes, it does pull the dogs in a bit. But that's just a photo there of the first couple of alpacas bonding with a little mob of sheep. We're just in experimental mode then. The sheep were very curious towards the alpacas when you first put them in. The sheep were more likely to walk up to the alpacas for a start until they sort of all get to know one another. We probably leave them in the sheep yard for a couple of days, and then we let them go into a slightly bit bigger paddock, and we just sort of go and check on them every day. Every mob of alpaca seems to be a little bit different on the length of time it takes to bond them. We just keep a bit of an eye on them until we sort of see that everyone's sort of running together and feeding and camping and all that together. And you'll soon know, as soon as you open the gate and let them out into a bigger paddock, you'll soon know whether the alpacas are bonded well enough or not. Yeah, like I said, every mob's different. It takes a bit more time with some of them. Yeah, I sort of can't tell you too much more really. Basically, Pat's sort of said most things. We have considered dogs, but the baiting side of it wasn't ideal. I like to still try and keep baiting. I don't think baiting's quite as good as it used to be. And there's probably a bit less work in the alpacas. But that's sort of how it's going. And that's sort of about all I can really tell you. How we going, Alex?
Yeah, very good, Peter. All right, thanks for that. There's a question here which will probably be for, well, either of you, if you can answer it. It's talking about, can the alpacas consume grain with the sheep? Have you had any experience with that, Peter? Or?
I've never tried. I've never tried to feed them grain of any sort. We just started putting a bit of cottonseed out this year, and I never actually noticed the alpacas eating that either. So I don't know how you feed it.
Pat, have you had any experience?
No, Alex, we feed a lot of dry lick in tyres to sheep, and we also feed a lot of grain, corn that is, to our sheep, and that's mostly in automatic feeders nowadays, but I've never seen them actually having a go at any of that. I've seen them walk up to a tyre with dry lick in it and just have a bit of a sniff, but I don't think they've ever really had any of it. You don't see them standing there looking at it or anything like that. And the grain, when I bought those alpacas, a fellow called John Laurie, I couldn't think of his name earlier, the fellow called John Laurie at Wellington, we bought them off originally, and he told me that they are a bit susceptible to grain poisoning and to be careful with the grain, but we used to feed our ewes corn on the ground, and I never even saw them actually go near that stuff. But now that it's in the feeders, they wouldn't be able to get at it. But I don't think they touch lick at all, Alex.
Yeah. Righto. There's a comment here from Caroline Edmondson. She has 120 alpacas herself on a sheep and cattle and poultry farm near Texas, and she was saying that recastration we tend to cut, not ring, between 12 to 18 months. That's just carrying on from what Pat was saying earlier, and also males are not mature until about 2 to 3 years of age. And she was also talking about shearing and just saying that restraining them is a lot easier and makes things a lot easier. So just a couple of comments there from Caroline to support what Pat and Peter had said. So if there's any other questions, please type them into the question box or raise your hand. So we'll continue on, but if you do have any questions, please continue to type them into the box or, as I said, raise your hand. So thanks very much for that, Peter. That was a good presentation. We'll move on to David Jenkins now.
Okay, well, g'day everybody. It's been really interesting hearing about the experiences of the two previous speakers, because the sort of country that you blokes are working in is very different to what we've got down here in the southeast. The properties where I've done most of my work have been on the edge of the ACT up through into areas bordering on the Naji National Park and up through to Kosciuszko. and it's pretty undulating treed country. We get pretty severe winters, and but nevertheless the alpacas, and I'm going to talk about llamas briefly as well, they do very well in this country. So these animals come from, they're camelids, and they've been domesticated for several thousand years, and where they come from they're used for all sorts of things, apart which is sort of milk, fibre, skins, and they're used to carry stuff around. They're smart and they live for quite a long time, and they like to live in groups. That's how they operate normally. So putting them in with a group of sheep or something like that is something that there is the sort of group environment that they like to be. They're environmentally friendly because they've got very soft feet. They're a bit like kangaroos in a way, and they have strong herding instincts, and as we all know, they don't like canids very much. This guarding ability is something that's relatively been recently exploited, and once these animals have decided where their territory or their paddock is, they'll, as been mentioned earlier, they'll sort of cruise around and guard that area, and once they're bonded onto whatever it is that they're protecting, and it doesn't seem to matter what it is, it could be birds or animals, and they feel happy in their environment, they seem to really just get on with the job, and you don't have to really monitor it too closely. And as we've heard also, they're easy on fences, and just standard sort of sheep fencing will keep them confined. These things in their own countries will survive up to 3,600 metres, and they do well in the high country in the southeast, and I'm intrigued that they do well, that they're doing okay up in the sort of drier, hotter areas where you fellows are. The alpacas get up to around 70 kilos. They have excellent eyesight, and most of their spotting or becoming aware of predators is through line of sight, which is why it's really important where you can to have open country for these animals to work in. They are usually quiet, but they will make quite a bit of noise when they've got a dog in their sights. They will get used to dogs they know, but they still will remain aggressive to dogs that they don't know. Their management, well, as you mostly realise, is pretty much the same as sheep. They need vaccinations against clostridial diseases and regular drenching, and depending upon the type of country they're in, if it's really dry and stony and so forth, that'll keep their toenails down, but in softer sort of conditions you may need to keep an eye on their toenails and trim them off periodically. The good thing about these guys is that they eat grass and hay. They'll also eat coarser food such as rushes and blackberry bushes, which we've got a lot of blackberry bushes down here. They're a real problem. And they'll also have a go at serrated tussock, which is both the blackberry and the serrated tussock pest down here. So they'll have a chew at a lot of things. And they are browsers, and this might be one of the issues that have been mentioned here about eating poisonous plants. They will have a go at pretty much anything. Periodically they need to be shorn, and as has been already alluded to here, this can be quite an entertaining exercise and quite a procedure. The blokes that I've worked with, they tend to regard it much more as entertainment than anything else, but certainly, as has been mentioned earlier, if they're hobbled or tied up first, that does make life a lot easier. Incorporating alpacas into the livestock operation, I guess, is probably the most important aspect of all this, and their protective instincts aren't fully developed till they're about 18 months to 2 years old. If you're introducing alpacas into groups of pregnant ewes, that's probably the best. And all the work that we've done, we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks before the bonding process, and 4 to 6 weeks before lambs or kids are dropped, but you can certainly put them into groups of ewes or goats that are dropping young ones. But it's best to give them a good time with the adult animals before the babies start appearing. Fully grown castrated males are probably the best guards. Females will be okay, but the thing about the males is that they're cheaper to buy because the females are useful for breeding with. The entire males can be a complete pain in the arse because what they want to do is they'll try and mount the ewes and cause all sorts of stress and injury and all sorts of problems. It's best to castrate the males before they're 2 years old, anything from 6 months to 2 years. And as the lady said, she does hers around, I think she said 12 months. Certainly, the longer you leave them, the more attitude they're going to develop. And one of the things you want to avoid is having, if you've got several castrated males on the place, the last thing you want to do is to have them all wanting to have a blow at each other. So if you leave it too long, they're going to get really quite cranky with other late castrated males and can make a few problems. Down our way, we're looking at about 1 alpaca per 100 sheep in 20 hectares is ideal, but that's certainly not the situation that you fellows have got up there. In paddocks with obstructions, we're looking at 2 to 3 alpacas per mob of sheep, but try and avoid keeping them, particularly if we've got a lot of predators, and we've got foxes, we've got heaps of foxes down our way, and as well as the wild dogs, and there's an added complication, particularly in the ACT, where we've got marauding town dogs come out periodically. But the alpacas are able to cope with these pretty much okay. Okay, so the health considerations for these things, the fact that they have this sort of latrine type defecation where all the feces and urine tends to be dumped in the same place, and that they have very little fibre around the anus and the urinogenital area. This contributes greatly to low parasite burdens, and they don't seem to be subjected to fly strike. As we've already heard, the 5-in-1 clostridial vaccine should be administered regularly. Toenail trimming may be an issue, and these guys are not subject to OJD, but they will contract BJD. However, from about 2002, we have no alpacas with BJD, but I haven't been able to find any information on the current BJD situation in alpacas. But certainly, as far as OJD is concerned, they're not a problem. Case study, just for your information, there was a bloke that joined 1,000 ewes, and he put 10 alpacas in with them, and he had 1,000 ewes on the same property without alpacas. And in the first year, he had a 14% increase in lambs at marking in the mob with the alpacas compared to the ones without. The following couple of years, it wasn't quite so good, whether it was the fact that the foxes, he had main problem with foxes down where he was, whether they were able to work out a strategy to get round them to some degree, I don't know, but it seemed to drop back a bit. But it was maintaining itself around 5 to 10% more lambs on the ground. So the alpacas in his operation certainly paid for themselves pretty well in the first couple of years. So just quickly on llamas, they come out of the Andes, they go up to high altitudes, they do really well in southeastern Australia in the cooler areas. They get up to about 200 kilos and can stand a couple of meters high, and they're really calm, and they also are aggressive towards canids. They have a few advantages over alpacas. They're taller, they're bigger, they're faster. Like alpacas, they've got good eyesight, and the fact that they're taller and have less fibre around their eyes gives them a bit of an advantage in the fact that they can detect intruders at a greater distance. Now, whether they're better to use in areas where dingoes and wild dogs are the main problem has yet to be investigated, I think, but certainly their actual physical presence is much greater than alpacas. Their management, similar to alpacas, they once again don't reach their full potential until they're about 2 years old, wean about 6 to 8 months, castrate 6 to 24. Same as alpacas, using gelded males, much more useful and much less trouble. The females will also work as guards, but like the alpacas, they're more expensive to buy. And one thing about the llamas is if you're hand feeding sheep and the llamas, the llamas themselves may become aggressive if they're sort of jostled out of the way by the sheep and start getting difficult. So that's easily resolved by just putting a food container a bit higher off the ground that the llama can feed from, but the sheep can't get to. Bonding, 4 to 6 weeks, same as the alpacas. You need to shear them, usually biannually, and there are some that molt and don't need shearing. Drenching needs to be done a couple of times a year, and then they need vaccinations against clostridial disease. So it's pretty much the same as alpacas. The disadvantages of llamas is that they, being that much bigger, a bit feisty, they can jump fences to reach another llama or another mob of sheep. And if you have 2 llamas in adjacent paddocks, they tend to spend all their time socializing over the fence rather than concentrating on guarding the sheep. So you need to have a paddock or 2 between your guarding llamas and the sheep mobs. And llamas may occasionally start giving lambs a bit of a hard time. So that's pretty much it. We've got a few people down our way using llamas. There's some farmers right up against the state forest near Charles Sturt University. We've been working with them for a while, and we have wild dogs up there, and they were losing a lot of lambs, and they went over to the llamas, and the lamb losses dropped substantially. But the forestry people were doing some quite good dog control, and the dogs weren't a big issue, and it became absolutely apparent that it wasn't the dogs that were the problem, it was the foxes, and the foxes had been carrying the lambs away, and the farmers hadn't realized quite the impact they were having. So we had alpacas on some farms and llamas on others, where we were trying to see who worked best. But it didn't seem to make a difference. They helped out really well on both properties. So my feeling is that although they're not the silver bullet to completely solve your problems, they can certainly go a long way to helping. That's pretty much all I've got to say. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right, thanks, David. While you're there, David, there's a question from Pat, actually, saying, have you had any experience with using shearing tables for alpacas?
No, not at all. Just tie them up and do it on the floor like everybody else seems to.
Rightio. There's a question here about selling the fleeces, and where do you sell the alpaca fleece to? Peter said that he obviously doesn't sell them. Pat, what do you do with the fleeces?
No, Alex, I've still got quite a few butts of fleeces here. I've made a few inquiries about trying to sell it on numerous occasions without success. So I did get offered a small amount of money for it, but I had to get it delivered down to Plymouth, Victoria or somewhere. And when I bought those females and that buck earlier in the year, that lady down at Narendra, I asked her if she knew of anywhere that I could sell the fleeces, and she told me that she had trouble selling her really good fleeces. She actually shows some alpacas in the shows, and their fleeces would be way nicer than ours. and she said that she finds it very difficult to sell even really good fleeces, and the VM content in those fleeces is always an issue. They want virtually zero VM content in the fleeces, or they'll just reject them. So that makes it virtually impossible for us guys, because those alpacas are always rolling around on the ground, scratching themselves in the dirt or whatever they're doing, and there's always a lot of VM in their wool. So at this stage, I haven't got any suggestions for selling it. I've kept it, and as Peter Sheehan said earlier, we've given a bit away to people for spinning and that kind of thing. But apparently recently I heard there's been a bit more increased interest in alpaca fleece, so I'm sort of going to hang on to it in case something happens down the track that we might be able to get a few dollars for it. I'm sort of a little bit reluctant to burn it all. Alex?
Yep. All right. Thanks, Pat. David, do you have any comment with that?
Well, there are a number of people or retail outlets, certainly down in the southeast, that are selling alpaca garments, and you can buy alpaca wool. So there's certainly it's being processed somewhere, but I honestly can't give any suggestions as to where people might go to make inquiries. But there is a market for garments with alpaca wool.
Right, thanks for that. There's another question here asking, will they browse mulga? Peter, have you had any experience with that?
I've never put them into the mulga country, but they're pretty quick to eat mimosa bushes and stuff like that. And they will, like I was saying there before, they will try anything and everything. I've seen them nibble at a giddy tree and that, but I haven't actually had experience of them in the mulga yet.
All right. And Pat, have you any experience with that?
No, Alex, we don't have any mulga at all, but as Peter said, they love the mimosa. We've got quite a bit of mimosa along gullies and little hollows and that sort of thing on our country, and if you put them into a fresh paddock, not that we do that very often, we tend to leave them in one paddock in their groups, so that is actually their territory, but they do love the mimosa. I don't actually see them ever eating whitewood or anything like that, but no, I can't answer the mulga one.
Rightio. There's a question here just talking about ovine and bovine yoni diseases. It's a wasting disease which we don't have in Queensland, so if you are sourcing alpacas, you just want to do a bit of research into where they're coming from, as there is the exclusion zones in New South Wales. So, a question here, are alpacas effective against eagles? Pat, I'll start with you.
Was that me, Alex? Sorry, Pat?
Yeah, sorry. Is there, are alpacas effective against eagles?
I don't know, to be honest. I've never seen them going for an eagle. I haven't actually had any experience with them attacking a bird. I've heard people say that they are effective against them, but I suspect that there's that many eagles around that they'd be going all day, all over the damn paddock sometimes, and I don't think they would have a chance of being a huge success in that regard.
All right. Peter, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, not really. I'd agree with Pat there. I've never seen them to have a go at an eagle or anything. I really don't think they would, but maybe in a small, couple of 100-acre paddock or something with a little mob of ewes that they can sort of be on top of all the time. They might be able to control it a bit maybe, but yeah, not out here.
Yep. Righto, thank you. There's a comment here from Carolyn Edmonston again saying one of our shearers uses a table just as easy as on the floor, but this table is custom built. There's a question asking price range for castrated males, or Pat or Peter. Pat, to start with you.
Yeah, Alex, I haven't bought any recently. I paid $500 each for those first ones, but I know they've got a bit cheaper now. There's a fellow up around Aramac that bought some last year, and he got his for $350. So I think around the...
Sorry, you can go.
Sorry, what was that?
No, you keep going. You're right.
Yeah, I think at the moment around 350 is the asking price for wethers. I've seen them advertised in the land and that a bit. There's virtually none advertised ever in Queensland that I can find. We paid 500 for those females, but yeah, 500 was what we paid initially, but I'm pretty sure you could get them around 350 now. But I find the biggest problem is finding any numbers of them anywhere that can sell you 10 or 15. You know, most places have got 3 or 4 or 1 or 2 for sale, but if you want to buy a few of them, it's always, I found it a little bit difficult to get numbers.
Righto, and Peter, any comments?
Yeah, we paid 500 for all of ours. I've been boarding for over 12 months now. We got onto a place near Toowoomba there, and they had a mob of, I think she said 300 or 400 alpacas, and that's one of the reasons why we went there. We could go and pick up a big mob, and like Pat was saying, other than that, you're only getting mobs of 1s and 2s, and which is a bit of a nuisance, really.
Yeah. Okay. There's just another comment from Caroline saying there is private spinners. It also does make a great mulch underneath the hay for the garden, and also the AAA, which is the Australian Alpaca Association, has a list of fleece buyers. So I imagine you can see that on the internet. Right then, well, that's about all I can see as far as questions. So I'd like to thank all 3 presenters today, Pat, Peter and David, for their presentations. It was very interesting hearing what you had to say about the alpacas and how they're working for you, so much appreciated. And also I'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. If you want some more information, you can see there's a couple of websites there which you can visit to find out more information. So that's all from me today. So thanks again to the presenters, and thanks for joining in today's webinar. And also please keep an eye out for the evaluation that will be emailed to you if you please fill that out. So thanks a lot for everyone joining. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.